Senator Audette, thank you very much.
Madame la Présidente, le peuple Anishinaabe.
The Anishinaabe people, I was so eager to share my love with you, my feelings, my emotions, but also my experience as a senator facing a bill, C-13, an Act for Substantive Equality of Canada's Official Languages. I noticed that many of you are very passionate about this, passionate about living in a minority situation in regions where French is not seen in the downtown areas, in signs. My son lives in Vancouver, and I want him to continue to speak English, and my granddaughter as well. But things are complicated. I've seen your passion here in Canada, rather here in the chamber, but also your fear of losing your language. And I'm going to try to reassure you, not frighten you. I will remain, however, faithful to my approach and my words. We've all traveled. We've all been to other places, other territories, and in every place we go, the language is the first thing that we hear. Sometimes we notice the difference, and language is what gives us our identity, our culture, our relationship to a territory, and our responsibilities, a history, a contemporary life, as well as aspirations for tomorrow. And it's the same thing here in Canada, not just abroad. It's the same thing right here in this beautiful chamber. You've surely heard the president of, or the chair rather, of Inuit Tapirit Kanatani, ITK, when he arrived with his bill in 2018, which would recognize Inuktitut as an official language of Canada. This did not work. The bill didn't work. Rather, it instead turned into an Indigenous Languages Act. But he attempted this, and things turned out otherwise. You'll understand that sometimes I attempt to speak English. Sometimes it's franglais. I make up words, or sometimes I don't think they really understand me. But you're patient. You're patient with me. And sometimes people say, can you repeat what I'm saying? That is my reality, my everyday reality. I speak French. I learned it. But my father, a Quebecer, but my mother was Innu, or is Innu, and I carry the two languages within me. And every time we talk about official languages, I will say these few words I just said in my own language. I'm surrounded by lawyers, but it's not up to me to defend necessarily this bill. It's other communities who should be doing it. But however, minority communities will be the ones who are vulnerable, and they will be classified according to their vulnerableness. So by UN as vulnerable, endangered, seriously endangered, or critically endangered. So I understand that we're talking about Indigenous languages in this case. So I understand that the rights are not the same, and we have to understand how we can ensure that our rights eventually connect. I don't want us to always be going to court for this to happen. And at any rate, I don't have the means to go to court all the time. There's already too many cases in court. And this duality of language is also something that inhabits me when I examine this bill that defends French, which is incredibly important. I've noted for the English situation, the English minority situation, that it's the same thing, and it's the same thing for so many Indigenous communities who are required to speak English. Mary Simon was required to speak to learn English. She was not allowed to study in her own language. And in Quebec, that becomes another linguistic barrier that turns into a legal issue. We're hearing the word Charter of the French language. Is that not just a tool for the United Nations to be unable to challenge this question? Sometimes things happen and they can only be adjusted later. We realize later that they need to be adjusted. But there are situations of danger and precarity. You heard my colleague, who's not here today, Senator Down, who felt that we had missed an historic occasion to add Indigenous languages to the preamble. We could have mentioned them as being founded languages. I have 60 amendments on that for you just tonight. That was a joke. No, I don't have 60 amendments on the question of Indigenous languages, but I'm convinced that within 10 years, Indigenous languages will be added as official languages. And the fact that there's the Indigenous Languages Act is encouraging. However, the rights and powers are not at all, will not be at all the same as those of the official languages community and commissioner. There needed to be an inquiry into missing Indigenous women and murdered women and girls before we could say that Canada re-add in its official languages, or in its languages, Indigenous languages. Perhaps one day I'll be a ghost here in the Senate before that happens, but I'd like to see it happen before. The Minister, Petipa Taylor, I ran into her and I said, good luck. We discussed issues. It was very nice. However, there were 4 things. I said 3 at the beginning. There were 4. Words are important. And other senators have said this, words are important. Words turn into paragraphs. Paragraphs become law. Any Indigenous languages bills must pass the UNDRIP test, and you need to work with guardians, people who are linguists, jurists, not just Canadian jurists, and discover where we can add bridges, build bridges to give more teeth to this idea, and be able to, so that I will be able to understand what's happening in my Indigenous language and in French and English. This is not yet the case. I've been told it will be the case with Indigenous languages. I think we could have come up with a better balance if we have had time. I'll be here until 2040. The time to analyze this bill in depth, but things are going too fast, and there has been, strong debates between colleagues. Let's ensure that when the word reconciliation is mentioned, when Commission of Official Inquiry, when National Inquiry into Missing and Murder and Indigenous Women and Girls is mentioned. The Canadian government ordered these initiatives so that eventually there would be cohabitation and languages would come into this. So that if even it's later, 17 years from now, there will be protections for minorities, Indigenous linguistic minorities. I have great faith, not always, but I will not give up. Some of you know me well. You may not always know what I'm like, but I will not give up. So for me to say that Mr. Miller, Mark Miller, or the next minister that in charge of Indigenous relations or another Indigenous issue, that when a minister refuses to translate into an Indigenous language a success story between an Indigenous nation and the government, well, this needs to be done. This needs to be covered in law. And the commissioner in charge of such issues has to have the necessary powers to have such a thing done. There needs to be more, this bill needs to be more robust. One day, it would be great if Indigenous peoples were entitled to 5% Indigenous music, thanks to the CRTC.